In his article, The Emotive Meaning of Ethical Terms, C.L. Stevenson first gave us 3 criteria that a theory of the meaning of moral terms must meet. Then he gave us a theory that he said met those criteria. In the previous video, I discussed whether his theory actually did meet his 3 criteria. In this video, I want to discuss the merits of the criteria themselves. So here are the 3 criteria that Stevenson says a good theory of the meaning of ethical terms must meet. First, a theory on the meaning of moral terms must explain moral disagreement. People do in fact disagree and debate moral claims. Second, it must account for what Stevenson calls magnetism, which he explained as follows, quote, "A person who recognizes X to be good must ipso facto acquire a stronger tendency to act in its favor than he otherwise would have had," end quote. Third, Stevenson claimed that a theory of the meaning of moral terms must respect the fact that values are not things that can be discovered scientifically. Science tells us how the world is. It describes the world. It doesn't tell us how things should be. I'm not going to dispute Stevenson's claim that when we make moral claims, we often see ourselves as having disagreements. One person says that abortion is wrong. Another says that abortion is permissible. And each takes the other to be mistaken in some way. It's not just a matter that each person has different tastes regarding abortion. Each regards their attitude towards abortion to be correct. And those who do not share that attitude, well, they're making a mistake. Stevenson's claim that a theory of ethical terms must account for what he called magnetism deserves a closer look. Let's accept for the sake of argument Stevenson's claim that, quote, "A person who recognizes X to be good must ipso facto acquire a stronger tendency to act in its favor than he otherwise would have had," end quote. One of the things that this implies is the following. If a person doesn't acquire a stronger tendency to act in its favor than he otherwise would have had, then it's not the case that he would recognize it to be good. Now, this might be true, that he would not recognize it to be good. However, what we're interested in knowing is if it really is good. If I don't see the characteristic markings of a black widow spider, I may not recognize it to be a black widow spider. But it doesn't follow from this that it's not a black widow spider. Similarly, if I fail to act in favor of something, I may not recognize it to be good, but that doesn't mean that it's not good. What it means for something to actually be a black widow spider and what it means for something to actually be good need not depend on our reaction. This might be hard to understand. However, perhaps I can make it clearer by looking at belief. Somebody doesn't sincerely assert that something is true unless they believe it. I can't sincerely assert that carbon dioxide emissions are warming the planet if I did not believe that carbon dioxide emissions were warming the planet. However, the fact that somebody can't sincerely assert that carbon dioxide emissions are warming the planet doesn't prevent it from being true. Similarly, the fact that somebody doesn't show a greater tendency to act in favor of something doesn't prove that it isn't good. So, correcting Stevenson's original claim goes as follows. A person who does not acquire a stronger tendency to act in its favor than he otherwise would have had may not recognize it as being good, but it could still be good. I also don't see how this thesis of magnetism is compatible with the way that I learned the meaning of wrong as a child. When my parents told me that it was wrong to write on the walls or to take my brother's things without their consent, or to enter their room unless I was invited, how could I have gotten from that to the belief that for something to be wrong, I must feel a reluctance not to do it? Particularly since that would further imply that if I felt no reluctance to do something, then it wouldn't be wrong. I mean, I can imagine telling my parents as a child, "You must be mistaken. I feel no reluctance to writing on the walls, and unless I have this tendency not to do it, your claim that it's wrong must be mistaken." What I did learn about the meaning of wrong from my parents telling me that some things were wrong is that to call something wrong meant that others had reasons to yell at me for doing them. Yelling, or worse, In fact, it meant that people had reasons to yell, or worse, at anybody who did similar things in those circumstances. Note, I didn't learn that calling something wrong meant that people would yell at me. One can pick up pretty early in life that it's possible for one person to accuse another of doing something wrong and be mistaken. Somebody else would come along and correct them. Something like, leave the kid alone. He's not hurting anybody. Actual wrongness requires that people have a reason to condemn it. And in the case of things that are right, a reason to praise it. Somebody who does something particularly good can be praised. They can be called a hero. This also calls into question the claim that a moral fact can't be known through science. I can, for example, know that an act of a particular type, such as drunk driving, creates a risk of injury or death for others. I can know that others, for example, have reasons to condemn or worse those who engage in drunk driving, in which case it seems I may be able to know that drunk driving is wrong. In the same way that I could know that others have reasons to condemn drunk driving, I could know that others have reasons to condemn those who lie, who cheat, who take property without consent or damage property, those who commit assault or rape, or who kill. This proposition needs some further investigation. However, that's going to have to wait for another time. What I just said about moral claims being claims about what others have reasons to praise or condemn bring up an important component of Stevenson's own theory, what he calls the dynamic purpose of moral claims. In Stevenson's own theory of the meaning of moral terms, he argued that moral claims have what he called a dynamic purpose. Stevenson wrote, quote, "On the other hand, we use words to give vent to our feelings, interjections, or to create moods, poetry, or to incite people to actions or attitudes, oratory," end quote. A dynamic purpose of praise and condemnation is to incite, to use Stevenson's term, people to have different attitudes towards what is praised or condemned. It certainly seemed a part of my parents' dynamic purpose in telling me some things were wrong, to shape my attitudes in such a way that I wouldn't do them. What I learned is that a part of the meaning of wrong is that they referred to things not to do. Similarly, to say that something is permissible is to say that it would be wrong to condemn those who do them. They're on the safe list. Whereas if something is obligatory, then it's something that one has to do. That reasonable condemnation would follow upon a failure to do them. The possibility of using moral claims to alter another person's values and, in doing so, shape their behavior invites a question that Stevenson didn't consider. What behaviors does it make sense for us as a community to promote in everybody? Given a power to shape the attitudes of people within a community can easily enter into a debate over what types of behaviors are we to discourage or encourage in each other. And this leads us back to Stevenson's criterion that a theory of the meaning of moral terms must be able to make sense of disagreement. People can have actual disagreements over how to react to somebody having an abortion, executing a convicted criminal, to homosexual relationships, to the eating of animals, or to the spanking of children. Does one want to live in a community where these are discouraged, required, or left alone? Now, Stevenson characterized moral disagreement as two or more people trying to get each other to share the same values. His example is of a couple debating whether to go to the cinema or to a concert. On his account, they're not debating a matter of fact, they're simply trying to get each other to share their values. Stevenson wrote the following, quote, "Let me give you an example of disagreement of interest. A, let's go to a cinema tonight. B, I don't want to do that. Let's go to the symphony. A continues to insist on the cinema, B on the symphony. This is disagreement in a perfectly conventional sense. They can't agree on where they want to go, and each is trying to redirect the other's interests. Note that imperatives are used in the example." End quote. But a disagreement over what form of entertainment to seek seems to be quite different from moral disagreement. A moral disagreement would be a disagreement over whether to nurture in one's community a disposition to keep promises, to repay debts, to refrain from such things as lying, theft, rape, and murder. One group says that we ought to have an attitude of disapproval for homosexual relationships. Another says leave them alone. They're not hurting anybody. And so the debate is over what it is reasonable to praise or condemn, what it is reasonable to encourage or discourage, which may be quite different from what is actually being praised or condemned. And this brings us back to the question of whether there is a fact of the matter as to what behaviors people generally have reasons to encourage, discourage, or leave alone. As Stevenson himself allows, a statement that is objectively true can still have a dynamic function. It's not the case that a statement is either descriptive or dynamic. It can be both. For example, as two children hide in the park as a part of a game, one may utter the objectively true proposition, somebody's coming. This objectively true claim also has a dynamic purpose, to cause the other player to be silent. Furthermore, the dynamic purpose depends on the truth of the utterance, since if the utterance is false, then there's no reason to be quiet. Another type of objectively true statement that can have a dynamic purpose is the following. It would be reasonable for people generally to harshly condemn anybody who acts that way in those circumstances. Now, this is a statement that can be delivered in a way that, at the same time, reports an objective fact and delivers the condemnation that the statement says is justified, a condemnation that would lose its reasonableness if the descriptive component turns out to be false. Nothing in this account prohibits the possibility of moral claims from being objectively true or false. So I've given reasons to reject Stevenson's claim that ethical terms contain, as a part of their meaning, an element of magnetism. The fact that others have reasons to condemn people who perform certain actions does not require that the person condemned actually be reluctant to perform that action. I've given reason to question the claim that a moral claim, a claim about what people generally have reasons to condemn, can't be objectively true or false, or known scientifically. And I've given arguments for adding a criteria for the meaning of moral terms that they must account for the reasonableness of praise and condemnation. One important insight that Stevenson provided involved this dynamic function of moral language. Moral language doesn't seek to describe the world. It seeks to change the world by promoting certain dispositions and discouraging others. And that this then invites the question, a question that a community can genuinely debate, as to which dispositions to encourage and which to discourage.